Welcome to the Mint City Soccer Show. I am one of your hosts, Matt Swift. David Gussler is back with us this week. Welcome back, buddy.
Yeah, it feels good. I had to dust off the cobwebs on the microphone a little bit and find a good outfit to make sure I matched the show a little bit because I had to scour the closet for it. But it feels good to be back, man. And thanks for holding down the fort for me while I was gone.
No worries. You've been doing a great job on Soccer and Coffee on Saturday morning, so we appreciate that.
I try, man. I try. I was out in California the past week, and that was a little rough coming back on Saturday and have soccer and coffee when I got used to the time change, but that's okay.
Well, yeah, that is rough. Yeah, but it's a good time. Soccer and coffee's fun.
It is.
We also have a very special guest in the house with us tonight. Is Eric Krakauer. Eric, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. You sound like you're hosting an NPR show, but you're also giving me Alec Baldwin vibes. You know the Shreddy Balls
yes.
Saturday Night Live skit?
That's my thing.
That's what you're reminding me of right now.
Wow, so Eric's coming in hot, just insulting me, just immediately.
No, it was good. It was good.
Eric, this is your second time on the show, and I had to look back. You were last on the show, so this is episode 150, by the way.
Oh, wow.
But you were last on the show on episode 56.
It's been a while, huh?
Yeah, August 19th, 2022. So,
okay.
Can you believe it's been that long?
No.
That's insane.
You know what? I remember the night well. We were at, what is it, Salud? Is that the name of the place?
That's right.
Yes.
I've been back since then. They've got a very good meatball sandwich. Speaking of Shreddy Balls. But yeah, so love the place. Thank you for introducing me.
Yeah. It was very loud in there that night, if I recall.
It was very loud. I tried to listen to that pod to make sure I didn't say anything ridiculous, since you were also handing me beer bottles.
There you go. Yeah.
But it was difficult to decipher what I was saying, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah. Now you won't have to talk as loud tonight, which is nice. But I do miss the days of going to Salud and doing shows for sure.
I do, but I'm sure our listeners appreciate not having the background noise a little bit there, Smith. But
I do not miss that for one. I don't miss those editing challenges. Thank you very much.
It looks and sounds a lot more professional, so congratulations.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've learned
evolving.
a lot. Yeah, for sure. So a lot has changed, no doubt, since the last time you were on the show. You have covered this team for quite a while now, and you know this team better than most. I know it's tough to choose just one thing. So what are a few things that you've seen that has really improved us over the last 3 years, or even from last year to this season so far?
I'll name one thing or one person, Dean Smith. That's the answer. I think that his arrival revolutionized the team, the culture that he's brought in, which is in some ways antithetical to what was there before on the playing side. Just his overall demeanor, and his arrival, I think, brought in with him a winning mentality that was there at times in the previous 2 seasons, but it wasn't as consistent. The demands were always there, but there is a way in which he approaches coaching, approaches his role within the team, that I think that just galvanizes everybody around him. And we've seen that right from the go. In fact, I remember sitting at his introductory press conference, and he was asked about expectations. And the first thing he said was to win. And I remember that when he said that, it struck me initially. I didn't know him. I had met him about 1.5 years earlier because he actually was in the stadium when Christian Lattanzio took the helm for the very first time in a 2-0 win against the New York Red Bulls. Ben Bender and Sergio Ruiz scoring that day, if I'm not mistaken. in that game. So I'd met him, very nice guy, clearly charismatic, which we've all learned. But when
Mhm.
you have been around the game as long as I have and around coaches, when you hear that, sometimes it can sound not empty. I don't think that's the correct word, but you don't buy it right away. But
Mhm.
what became clear was that he meant it. He really meant it. That winning everything that Charlotte were playing in was the goal. And I think that sort of belief, that sort of expectation quickly diffuses around the club. And that's why I think that he's the one that has really catalyzed what we have been seeing over this season and last year as well.
What about his style of play that he's brought to this team that really sticks out to you? Because under Latanzio, we basically had the same back line, right? And didn't fare so well. But, Dean comes in with the same personnel, and then we have the opposite effect where we have one of the best defenses in the league. But what about Dean? Do you think that he, playing style wise, has brought to this team that has really been beneficial? Just is it playing simple? Is it counterattacking? Like what have you seen that has really worked?
I think he basically created the blueprint for um, a footballing style that better fits the personnel available at Charlotte. I understand what Christian Latanzio was trying to do, and people have very short memories because when things went well, they went very well. I'll never forget that 5-game mini season when he was still the interim. It was exciting football. It was front foot football, and it got bums off of seats in the stands. Now things didn't go so well in his second season. I think that he made some changes that didn't necessarily translate into results, and also didn't seem to fit the player profiles that he had available to him. And in that aspect, Dean comes in, looks at the players that he has available to him, looks at their strengths, looks at their weaknesses, and basically determines that a more conservative approach is necessary. You know, as well as saying that his goal was to win when he arrived, he said that his priority was to fix the back line, to fix the defensive end of things, to make the team more compact, to make the team more rigid, or rigid perhaps not the correct word, but more solid. And he
Yeah.
did that, right? You build the back, you build the foundation, and go on from there. And what we have seen since then is a progression. Not much has changed on the defensive end of things since he's taken the reins. But offensively, we've seen some changes. Sometimes the team possesses the ball a little bit more. Sometimes it's more about breaking in transition, trying to catch teams that outpossess Charlotte by exploiting spaces behind them. So I think he's continuously tweaking the attacking side of things depending on who's available to him. But one thing that has been the constant is the defensive resilience of this team.
Nice. Yeah. No, I agree. It's been a good shift from Latanzio, I think, to our new coach. Just the style of play and to your point, Eric, like making the style conducive to the players that he have instead of kind of forcing something like this is how I'm going to do it no matter what, and I'll move some pieces around that really don't make sense to try to do it. Just being more a little pragmatic and straightforward has helped a lot.
Yeah, I think pragmatism is a really important thing in soccer. And I do believe that we're seeing a little bit of a pendulum swing, not just in Charlotte, but in world football as a whole. There was a move towards, or there was a belief that every coach who was in charge of a team needed to have a footballing philosophy and needed to stick to that philosophy. And I think that some coaches were ridiculed when they took a more pragmatic approach. And for a while, the so-called pragmatic coaches weren't really hired by the biggest teams. Possession-based soccer was the preference that most coaches
Mhm.
had.
Yeah.
A high pressing team with a high defensive line. And that was one of the things that we saw from Christian Latanzio. We saw not only a team that had a very high defensive line, but also, for the most part, man-marked all over the field. And that exposed the team against better opposition with better players. I mean, the goal that comes to mind for me is the goal that was scored by Lucho Acosta in what was, I think, a 4-1 or 3-1 win at TQL Stadium. In that game, Cincinnati were superior, but they also benefited from a sort of kamikaze approach to defensive football. You know, the high line and making sure that you track your man all over the field. And Lucho Acosta really took advantage of that and scored, I believe, the best goal of the season, where he cut through 2 or 3 players who were scrambling: Malanda, Privet, and Byrne, I think. You know, they had to adjust their positioning. They were now playing a reactive defensive soccer as opposed to a more structured approach, which is what we have seen with Dean.
Sure.
How much of that you think is Dean kind of relying on his experience from being a former player, like being a former center back and having that experience playing, you know, in England, and having that experience compared to, you know, I'm not trying to compare him to Christian Latanzio, et cetera, but does have that experience of being a player, but then also being a coach before coming here?
I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, look, he played in the Premier League as a center back, not for many years. I know that most of his playing years were in the lower divisions, but still, that's a very high level of soccer. And it's worth noting that very often MLS gets compared to the championship stylistically. Ashley Westwood has spoken to me about that. And I think that for him, the differentiation was that the floor is higher in the championship, but the ceiling is higher in MLS because you have more quality players, more technical players, you know, like the aforementioned Lucho Acosta, and now Evander, who replaced him in Cincinnati, for example. There are lots of those players. Carles Liel as well, who we'll surely talk about a little bit later, since we're facing New England next. So, you know, you look at the resume that Dean Smith has, and that absolutely influences his approach to the game. But what I like about him the most, regardless of where his influences come from, because if you watched from Walsall, and I'm not going to say that I watched a lot of Walsall, but I've watched bits and bobs, because once he arrived, I wanted to, you know, make sure that I had as much research on him as possible. But from Walsall to Brentford to then Aston Villa, and then his time at Leicester City, there were differences in his approach, and that was based on the players available to him. I mean, there was a time at Aston Villa when the club and Brentford, when those two clubs were playing front foot football, attacking football, and that had a lot to do with the kinds of players available to him. And I think that as he continues to build the Charlotte roster, and I think he and Zoran, and we have to talk about what Zoran has done in front office, they've built a very competitive team that has its strengths. And I think that they will look over time, you know, he's just signed his extension, Dean Smith, over time to evolve the team even more. And I think one of the areas that they'll perhaps look to is how to create a more multifaceted attack, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned Zoran, so I have to bring this up just because I peruse different social media platforms for Charlotte FC things. So there was a post on Reddit the other day talking about giving kudos not only Dean Smith, but even to Zoran for the players he's brought on, especially this offseason, adjusting how he brings players in and the roster build from year 1 and year 0 to even now. And I know we've had Zoran on the show. I mean, how important is it for him and Dean to have that good working relationship? And it seems like, I mean, this season, it seems like we've really knocked it out, not only with just Dean, but even with the players that Zoran's come in and the strategy with some of the players on loan.
It's crucial. It's crucial. Look, Dean wouldn't be here if it weren't for Zoran, right? Zoran has a ton of connections from his time as an agent and just his time around around the game, and he's got great relationships with people. And he was able to convince Dean Smith, who had reportedly, and he admitted to this himself in conversations with me on a podcast, so I don't think he'd be annoyed that I'd mentioned this, that he had options. But the project that was laid out by Zoran to him was an attractive one. Being able to build on an expansion team still in its infancy in a league that is growing by leaps and bounds is something very attractive to a lot of coaches. And I think we're going to see a lot more coaches coming to the United States, to MLS specifically from Europe, coaches with a lot of pedigree. But just focusing on Zoran very quickly, and not necessarily just on his relationship with Dean and having brought him here, but if you look at the work that Zoran has done, and I'm not suggesting that he's gotten everything right, because nobody has, but he brings in, or the first Charlotte coach, Miguel Angel Ramirez, is a coach, talking about philosophers, right? Coaches with deeply held footballing philosophies. Miguel Angel Ramirez was one of those guys, right? He saw football in one specific way. This is how we play. I remember he once sat with me and Lloyd and a few of the other journalists, and he explained his buildup. And I asked him, well, what happens if that particular approach, he had these little, he had one of those magnetic boards, and he was moving these little magnets. And I said, well, what happens if you're not able to go through those movements? I didn't use plan B, but I basically said something along the lines of, what is the alternative? And he said, well, there really is no alternative. This is the way we're going to play. If we can't move the ball in that particular phase, we bring it back to the goalkeeper and do it all over again. And that's what we saw. And that's what we saw over and over again. Now, he complained that he didn't have the players available to him. I thought that was a cop-out. We all remember that soundbite that we needn't talk about. But going back to Zoran built a team in the mold that Miguel Angel Ramirez expected. He brought in players who would fit in his system. Alan Franco, a very good player. Titi Ortiz, a very good player, right? But it just didn't work. And I know you're probably laughing because these guys didn't succeed. But
I'm
Alan
not
Franco,
a Titi Ortiz fan, but Alan Franco, I'll give you, but Titi.
Alan Franco went on to play in a Libertadores final recently, and a semifinal before that. Titi Ortiz, it didn't quite work out, but remember that when Latanzio took over, he said in one of his press conferences that Titi Ortiz was one of his best players, and things didn't work out between him and Titi Ortiz as well. So there was an understanding that this was a guy with a lot of talent. I called his games when he played for Independiente del Valle, and I was very excited about him. But I digress. The point that I'm making is expansion team, hard enough to build. But then you have to find players who fit into the system that your coach espouses, right? Now he goes. Christian Latanzio, who was his number 2, who had to help implement his system, now has a slightly different idea of how things should be played. So now Zoran has to retool the squad to fit his footballing philosophy. And that takes a while because not only do you have to bring in new players, but you have to find homes for the ones who don't fit in. Now, third coach, Dean Smith, the first one, and this to your point, Matt, the first one who played himself professionally, which I think is important when we discuss his impact on the team. He comes in and he's playing a far more pragmatic type of football, but you don't need to overhaul the team because he has studied the team, he has seen what's available to him, and then he has formulated his processes around the players available to him. Yeah, and that's all Zoran. Zoran's building that team. And now if you look at the team this season, look how it's evolved from last season.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be not a shock to anyone, but everything you said, Eric, kind of makes me think that I was 100% correct about the first 2 coaches and why I don't like them and why they're not here. But no, that was was a really good rundown of kind of the philosophy. And we've had Zoran on the show, and I've said a bazillion times, he's done a really good job of moving on from quote unquote mistakes or players that were not working very quickly. So I think that's been super, super handy.
Yeah. And that's not easy to do, because if a player isn't effective playing, the system that he was brought in to play, then other teams are looking at him and thinking, well, is he going to fit our system? He didn't play particularly well there. So it's not very easy to move a player. David, you were about to say, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I trust me. I'd rather hear what you have to say than I
You're the only one.
So, but I mean, like, I was just going to add, like, I mean, think about the difference in the roster even like 12 months ago. Like, Dean was able to study the roster and kind of build it, and then Zoran was able to, just to Matt's point, kind of quickly pivot and adjust. I mean, we started the season with Kamil Jóźwiak out, Karol Swiderski out on loan, had Enzo Capetti as our only designated player, and then now you come into this offseason and kick the season off. You've got Wilfried Zaha, you've got Liel Abada, you've got Pep Biel, who was a DP, now on a kind of a loan spell for us here.
He's
we
a TAM player now, yeah.
Right. And so I think Dean's shown that flexibility and be able to adjust the roster and still be able to get results is super successful. And then obviously now he's getting the roster built how he envisions with Zoran, and be able to kind of continue to get these results.
And he tinkers from game to game as well. We saw that against Nashville. He tried something in the first half. It didn't work. He made the correct adjustments. And
for sure,
Charlotte get all 3 points. He's a guy who, and I think this perhaps his most impressive quality is that he can take a 15-minute break and make a couple of tweaks and completely change the dynamic of a game. He's done that over and over and over again. That is not easy to do.
Yeah, I know we have some other questions. I don't want to jump, but you just brought up a good point. And we talked about this last episode and had some fan questions. We seem to be a second half team. Maybe that's just kind of, recent bias. Do you think we are a second half team because Dean is trying something in the first half, or maybe just not getting the best, and in those 15 minutes he's able to quickly change things? Do you kind of see us as a second half team?
Well, we sort of have been this season, right? Against Atlanta United.
Been weird, right?
We saw that happen where he tweaked, and it was a complete avalanche attacking wise. And after the second goal, Atlanta were dead and buried. You saw they had no reaction whatsoever. In fact, the substitutions that were made by the coach whose name escapes me right now suggested that he'd pretty much given up on that game. Against San Jose, they scored a couple of goals in the first half. So I think your overall point stands that more often than not, we've seen an uptick in the second half.
Yeah, that's a good quality, because you don't want the reverse of that. I mean,
exactly.
It's nice to have 3 goals in the first half, no doubt, but Dean is able to really make some adjustments or really light a fire under our team at least. But David, sorry.
Yeah, you're good, man. So, and Eric, I know we haven't done an episode with on this show since we've had the Montreal road win, right? So our home form's been very, very good this year. I think it's 5 or 6 games in a row that we've won. If you go back to last season, I think it's up to 8 games. Yeah, 8 games now, right? Yeah,
scoring multiple goals as well.
So very, very good run of form at home, right? And it makes it very difficult to kind of play in. But what have you made of us being in our away form, right? So I know Montreal was like kind of the first time we've ever beat a team in Canada. Our away form hasn't been as quote unquote stellar, but I know like a friend of the show, Vaughn, even kind of mentions like it's very hard to win in MLS on a consistent basis. Excuse me, on the road. And what's your thoughts on the team's performance on that? And is it something that you just have to kind of settle and get what you get on the road in this league?
Well, let's underscore Vaughn's point. There is no league on the planet, at least from the data that I've looked at about 2 or 3 years ago, where the discrepancy in win totals between home and away is as great as MLS. And actually, I'm learning that now that I'm calling the NWSL, I'm seeing that in the NWSL as well, except for like this outlier weekend a week ago where most of the away teams won. And that happens sometimes in MLS as well. So there's that. Historically, whether with Dean or otherwise, Charlotte have not done particularly well on their travels. But I think that one of the most salient points about this season is that when you look at their away record, you have to focus on the teams that they've played away.
Yeah.
Right? You start the season in Seattle, the team that had one of the best home records in the league, the best defensive record in the league, the only team that had a better defensive record than Charlotte last season. I think they only conceded 7 goals at home in the entire campaign. They conceded 2 in that match. Yes, there was a lot of fortune involved, 100%. But how many times in the past 3 years has Lady Luck been not on our side, right? I sometimes joked in commentary that the footballing gods were against Charlotte in so many games, whether it was with refereeing decisions that were borderline but went against the crown, or just, the bounce of the ball. So you start in Seattle, you get a point. And I remember saying right after that when all is said and done in 2025, we're going to look back at that point in Seattle and it's going to matter. And Ashley Westwood told me exactly the same thing, because when it comes down to it, this is about math. That's how you win a league, if that is your goal, right? You pick up points when you can against some of the best teams. So it's a point there. Then you go to Miami. You go to play arguably the best team, well, not arguably, the best team in MLS has ever seen, at least in the regular season. They got the points record last year against New England, the team that held it before them. Should have won that game. They were the better team when both teams had 11 players on the pitch. So when there were 22 players on the pitch. In the second half, an early mistake from both Milana and Privet, you don't say that very often, allows Luis Suarez to find the Chilean fella, Allende, and I think Allende is Chilean, and he scores the goal. And after that, they just bunker in. And Mascherano, if we had questions about his tactical nous, well, he proved in that game that he's willing to sacrifice, the ball to make sure that they park the bus at the back, and that's exactly what they did. And Charlotte weren't able to get points there when they deserved them. Then Colorado, altitude, it's a factor. And what's the next game? Montreal. Oh, it just so happens to be their first home game after 6-7 games on the road. They're excited to be there. It's the second game for their interim head coach. So you're thinking that there's a little bit of an upswing as well in form. So when you consider all those things, it makes sense that they don't have as many points on the road this season as they should.
Yeah, it's certainly been nice to get a little bit of quote unquote luck, because I feel like we've been quite unlucky. But I think this first run of games has been very impressive, because our schedule was not easy at the beginning of the season. So to have the start that we have, and we'll talk about May coming up, because it's gonna get a little dicey. But you've covered MLS quite a bit. And you've seen how tough it is to win on the road. So to get these points early and against the teams that we did, where you are playing in altitude, and then go to Montreal, where we've historically not played well at all. So to get these early points is crucial, and it's going to play dividends down the road when it's the difference between first 4 or 5th, 6th, 7th.
Right.
But what do you think is the difference between being able to pick up points in Seattle and Colorado and Montreal? Are we just getting finally maybe a little bit of luck, or are we a team now that can grind out a point, or do we have the personnel now that we have someone like Zaha who can get into the box and draw a PK? Do you think that's the difference? What do you think has changed now?
Well, don't forget that Zaha wasn't in Montreal, right? So he as an outlet wasn't available to the team, and you could see how they were bunkered in, but they were also against the ropes for a lot of that second half. But they did have chances. They did have good looks at Jonathan Sirois, who's a very good goalkeeper. And I think Montreal are a better team.
How do you say that? How do you say that again?
Sirois.
I would. Yeah.
See Royce.
I don't know how much you've listened to the show, Eric.
I'm so
but,
glad that you had to. Yeah. Not me.
Well, listen. I've been criticized plenty from my pronunciations, but I'll leave it at that. But Jonathan Sirois, very good goalkeeper, had to make a couple of difficult saves. But you said grind. I think grinding out those 3 points is the correct way to describe it. This is just a resilient team. They were resilient last season. They didn't look as good offensively last season as they do this year, and Zaha is certainly a part of that. But it's also Pep Biel playing centrally. It's also Pep Biel having a preseason under his legs. It's also Ajiman growing as a player. Taklomati coming off the bench and showing that he has got a number of attributes that perhaps we didn't know he had available to him, and his growing confidence and his evolution under the stewardship of Dean Smith, who is known or has always been known as a player developer. And that's another thing that he said that he was coming to do here in Charlotte. So I think, to answer your question, this is a resilient team that was resilient last year, but has more confidence in itself, because if they look back, the players look back at how they were ousted from the playoffs, they can think or I think I was figuring out how to word this, because I certainly don't want to put the responsibility on the refereeing. Okay. And I know that that third game against Orlando was a controversial one, but it doesn't just come down to the referee, right? Pep Biel didn't get a red card in the first game just because of the referee. I don't think it was a red card, but he did stretch out his leg. Okay. And so that makes you're forcing the referee into a decision.
Sure.
But the point that I want to make is these players can look back at those games and think, wow, we were very close. And a few decisions here or there that might have gone our way would mean that we are facing Atlanta at home. And then, what might have been? They may have been playing in MLS Cup. And I know that's all like fantasy land, but really you could make that argument. Now, having said that, you have the basis for this season. The grit, the resiliency, the ability to keep clean sheets, the best goalkeeper in the league, who once again is proving that he's the best goalkeeper in the league, three of the best center backs in the league. For me, Malanda, it's amazing that he's still here. I'm sure the vultures are circling. I don't know that for a fact, but he's that good. And by vultures, I mean big teams in Europe. So I think what it is you are just seeing, and pardon me for using the word again, the evolution of this team, and a belief that they were very close last year, that they had the tools last year, and now they have even more players who give them different looks, and give Dean Smith an opportunity to tinker in every single match that he approaches.
You said evolution, and I want to get your thoughts on
many times.
No, that's all right. No, and you've touched, because I think that's true. I think we are seeing an evolution. One of the players I think is a big part of that, and I want to get more of your thoughts on, is Pep Biel. He came in last year, he started strong, got hurt, and then really wasn't much as a factor as probably he wanted to be and the fans. And we talked to Zorn about this, and I asked him, because I really wanted to see what he thought. I asked Zorn if he felt vindicated, because there was all this talk about Miguel Almiron and whatever. I think we got the better end of the deal. So I asked Zorn if he felt vindicated. And of course, he wasn't going to beat his chest and be like, yes, of course I do. But what are your thoughts on Pep? What do you like about his game, and how has he helped this team evolve into this next phase?
Well, look, I was very high on Pep when he was signed. I knew him as a player. I was calling some of his Zaragoza matches in the second division when I was still at beIN Sports. I knew the kind of player he was. I knew what he could offer. But I also understood that coming in late in the season, without much time to adapt not only to the team, but the league, it was always going to be very difficult. But we saw flashes, particularly against New England, who he's going to face again this Saturday. And our record against New England, not the best. I think that game was actually the first win I think against New England ever, or at the bank. No, second win, because the first ever win for Charlotte FC was against New England. So this was only the second win after a run of poor results. But he was playing out of position. He had to adjust, and then he had that moment against Orlando. I spoke to him before the last game in Orlando, after he had been sent off. He was in the office, and we've developed a pretty good relationship. He's a really down-to-earth guy. He's very approachable, and I think you can, from the outside, I think you notice that. Quiet, not somebody who's going to, take all the oxygen from a room. And I asked him, I said, Pep, do you know what's happening next season? And he wasn't sure yet. He knew that there were discussions, but he told me that he really wanted to come back. But I jumped a point that I wanted to make. The Crown Talk podcast, which is in the ether right now, we're not quite sure how that's going to go on because Lloyd is no longer with us, so it makes it a little bit harder. But we're planning some things. I said that Pep Biel could be our Carles Gil, our Jonathan Pozuelo. Very similar career arcs in that they were very good when they played for smaller teams. They went to bigger teams and it didn't quite pan out. They weren't able to establish themselves. And then they came to MLS and they were pivotal to the successes of their teams. Carles Gil, MVP, then comeback player of the year. I think he was, what's the award for new player of the year? New player of the year. I forget what
newcomer
of the year. Jonathan Pozuelo, same thing, gets an MVP. And they're very similar players stylistically. So I thought the Pep Biel was going to arrive here and he was going to, if given time, do exactly the same thing. And I think the most important thing to note here is that he had a preseason. And he's also playing in the hole, which is what he was brought in to do, where he was forced to play slightly to the right last season because of the players that were available around him. So he's where he's supposed to be, and now it's paying dividends, and I think it's only going to continue. I mean, look at his performance against San Diego. My goodness. Yep. And he looked like a mini-me among those trees. And I know what that feels like, and so do you, Matt.
It's true.
It's true. Let me tell you, sometimes I'm talking to Andrew Privet or Patrick Ajiman and Kalina. Actually, before the Unified game, I was chatting with Ajiman and Privet, and Kalina comes from behind me and kind of like puts me in a headlock. And it was already bad enough talking to those guys. I felt like I needed a footstool. But then to be enveloped by this enormous Croatian, you just feel like you're a tiny man. So Pep Biel, who's my height, the way he navigated those San Diego players who so athletic. I mean, I was on the pitch side for the first half. They were so big and so athletic, and watching him just put on the clinic in the middle of those players, it was really something to behold.
What specifically do you think he does well with in that number 10? And it's a position we've always struggled with, right? You brought up my favorite player, TT Ortiz, who I think is not. But we've always struggled with that position. What about Pep is kind of showing why he's having success? For me, I want to see if you agree. Like for me, when he gets the ball, he turns with purpose. Yep. It's never like nonchalant. But what else do you see about him, and why is he being effective?
I just think he sees the game a lot faster than a lot of players. He knows more or less what he's going to do when he receives the ball. Look at the first goal that Charlotte scored against San Diego. He is fortunate to keep possession of the ball. The ball ricochets off his legs. Now, I say fortunate knowing that some players just have magnetic tibia bones, right?
Mhm.
For some reason, every ricochet just bounces their way, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But he knew while that was happening that there was a runner who was cutting inside, and he threaded the ball. And from the angle that I had on that goal, because I was right next to the VAR monitor to the right, the first thing I thought was, there's no way through. And then, how did he see that pass? Because you could see right away that it's an intentional pass. It wasn't a fortunate pass. And then when I saw the replay, I was like, whoa, it really was a fortunate pass. He knew exactly what he was going to do. And every other sort of creative moment in that game, when he laid the ball through to Liel Abada, when his shot is saved, and then I think he was also involved in the one where the left back, center back who was taken in the expansion draft, Diop, where Diop clears it off the line. He just knew where he was going to put the ball and when. The pass for Taklobani. At one point, I was in one of the suites, which was behind the play, and I kept saying out loud, pass the ball, pass the ball, pass the ball, because Taklobani had made the run, then had to get back into position. But he knew exactly when to release that pass. Do you know what I mean? And that's just instinctual. That's what we call talent. So to answer your question, he just sees the game at a different speed. That's the kind of player he is.
We're big fans of Pep. At least I mean, you can see my title here, but yeah, they I've been very pleased with what his performance has been, and I'm sure the club is too. And I'm sure he's in the back end very happy too with being on loan, and his performance now is
his agent is probably very happy too.
Yeah, and he likes he likes being here. I should note too that now they're playing with a double pivot of sorts, right? So that obviously offers him a lot more freedom to do what he needs to do. So the system plays a big part in that as well. And you can't forget the two guys playing behind him. I mean, you have Westwood, who covered more ground than any player in MLS last season, and Brandt Bronico, who's not human. He's not human.
That's true.
and I have nothing but respect for Brandt Bronico. Somebody actually said to me last season, it was a commentator, somebody who's a friend of mine. I don't remember who it was, but I remember there was a friend of mine who is a commentator that I respect. And he said, well, Charlotte just would be better if Brandt Bronico wasn't really a starter, because that shows that they lack options in midfield. And my response was, listen, man, number one, you're not watching enough of Charlotte.
Exactly.
Number
two,
one,
get the hell out of here is what I was saying. But
number two, players have been brought in who everybody thought were going to displace him.
Yeah,
and somehow
I've said that on like 10 episodes, I think, in a row.
Right, and somehow
it's a common theme on our show.
He's there. He's there. And remember last season, he didn't start the season because of a hamstring injury. So I would go to practice sometimes, and he'd been practicing on the side, frustrated as hell that he wasn't able to play. He came back quicker than expected, hit the ground running, and changed the dynamic of the midfield. The guy is just there's so much I could say about Brandt Bronico, and ultimately, it can all be reduced to this: just a consummate professional and a really good dude. And I think all that translates into a player who doesn't get the respect he deserves in this league.
Yeah, well, we're also big fans of his on the show. But David, I think talking about this midfield is a big point of your, I think, your next question, if you want to tee that up for Eric.
Yeah, so you kind of already touched on it, and it could be what we've just talked about, but we're at 16 goals so far, which is tied for the most in the East, which is also way ahead of where we were at last year, right? What do you think is truly the main difference this year on our offensive output, right? Like being able to get these goals in early, and I think we're ahead of where we were at this time last year as well.
Well, I think Pep Biel is a big factor. Okay, I don't want to, go on about him again because I've said enough. But the fact that he has the freedom to create, he's a creative force on that team, is an enormous factor. Set pieces. as well. Melanda's goal in Seattle, Privet against San Diego. I know there are a couple of others that I'm missing here. There was a time when Charlotte could not score a set piece goal. I think one in the entirety of 2022, or maybe two. Not
was that
many.
The Swiderski free kick
against Cincinnati
There,
year one.
there was
that was that one.
Yes, and there may have been a header here. Oh, there was the Olympico as well.
Yeah.
So two, and I don't remember a headed goal from a set piece situation. Maybe in the second
we have all
phase.
these tall players. Yeah, and that's sure.
But so that is an area that is drastically improved, and I think that even though Zaha hasn't hit the ground running, the fact that he's on the field has a huge impact on the space available to other players. I mean, you've seen how he magnetizes 2-3 defenders. Well, that's going to open space for somebody else, and they're taking advantage of that. And I would say, you mentioned the 16 goals. I think only Vancouver with 20 or 21 has scored have scored more goals.
I think
Charlotte could be up.
They only have. I think they only have one more goal than us, right?
Number one is San Jose with 19.
Okay,
and
then
then it goes Vancouver, us, and I'm sorry, DC United also has 9. Or no, that's goals against. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah, I was going to say that does not seem right. That does not seem right.
It's hard reading the internet, but no, it's but no, Vancouver's up there though.
Yeah. So I think those are two big factors, and then the competition between Ajiman and Taklamadi is important. I know how important Enzo Copetti was to Ajiman because there was that competition in practice. You are going up against a DP who is expected to start, so he really had to push his game. And now Taklamadi is doing the same thing to him. Either one of these guys can start. And I know there was a lot of whinging or a lot of complaints about Charlotte not getting another center forward in the offseason, perhaps an MLS veteran, somebody who was a proven goal scorer. And to some degree, I was wondering if that was going to happen, but they knew what they had in Taklamadi and that it was just a matter of time for him to have the confidence and to bulk up a little bit to have the impact that he's had. And the last thing is, look, we've conceded 7 goals this season, which is second best, I think, in the league. I think one team has conceded only 6. Good defense translates into good offense, right? I know it's a cliche, but it's true. If you're solid at the back, you're not letting anything in. You can hit in transition. You can build out of the back. There's so much you can do if you have the defensive fortitude.
Yeah, I think we're second in goal differential. I think maybe Vancouver is just the only team ahead of us. We've conceded 7 and scored 16.
There might be plus 20 goals for Vancouver. No, that doesn't make sense. Never mind. I didn't get good grades in math.
Not me either. I think their goal differential is 11 now.
Miami's the only team that's better. Miami and New England are the only two teams.
You see, it's good to have somebody who's actually looking at the data as opposed to just pulling it out of his rear end.
Okay,
that's why we have multiple people.
I still can't read it right off the internet, but at least I have it up on my screen. So,
before I jump to the next question, let me ask you a follow up. It's something we touched on the show before. Do you think this is a team that's going to score goals by committee? Or do you think there'll be one person that really stands out? Some people have said when Tom Bogert was in town, he was like, "Oh, Patrick Audemaine's going to score. Should be scoring 20 goals or whatever." And I sat there, I was like, I don't know that he has to. I think this is going to be goals by committee. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I hadn't really thought about it, to be completely honest, but it makes sense. I mean, we're seeing it now. Right, we're seeing Ajiman score. We're seeing Taklamadi score. Liel Abada scoring. Pep Biel is scoring. Zaha has hit the back of the net a couple of times. He's assisted, and we're only going to see him improve. So yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah,
a couple of free kicks here or there from Westy and the set piece goals that I was mentioning. Yeah, it makes sense for that to be the case. But having said that, I would love to see someone like Patrick just start really scoring a load of goals. And, one of the things that should be said about him is that he's not getting a lot of calls. I mean, Maxu in Colorado, a veteran defender who I happen to like a lot, had him in a headlock at times, and he just wasn't getting the calls.
It's frustrating.
And at one point, he was fouling Patrick, but the call went against Patrick because Patrick fell backwards into him because he was being pulled. So I think that as he continues to establish himself in the league, and he really should have, because he's playing for the national team. And I'm not putting this on him. I'm putting it on the referees. This is a guy who's representing his country and has scored 3 goals in as many caps. So give him the respect that he deserves and give him the calls that he should be drawing.
I like it.
I was just going to add, sorry, Swift. I was just going to say, because going back to that committee thing, I think a lot of people in the offseason look at a team like Atlanta that signs a Latte Lath, right? And be like, hey, like the expectation is for him to score 20 something goals because of what they pay. And the offense is going to funnel directly through him compared to Charlotte, where you have a Liel Abada, you have a Wilfried Zaha, you have a Patrick Agyemang, you have, Pep Biel now, kind of by committee that anybody can score on the field. You mentioned Westwood and Brant scored some goals here and there. So we've got weapons all over compared to just having to funnel it through one person.
Yeah, Brant has a good finish on him. Who was it that he scored against last season with a little dinky chip? I forget who it was against, but that was the goal of a veteran forward, just the composure. I think he was the top scorer one season in his conference when he was playing at Charlotte. So how things change.
Interesting. Let me ask you about a player. You've mentioned him a couple times, and that's Wilfried Zaha. We've talked about him quite a bit on the show, and even when Tom was in town, I was saying that Zaha is a player that other teams and fans are absolutely going to hate. I always, as an Arsenal fan, hated playing Crystal Palace and hated him and hated his antics.
You played for Arsenal? You played against Crystal Palace?
Yeah, I did. Don't worry about it, Eric. There's been a little bit of criticism about Zaha already from some of the fans, which I don't agree with. But I'd like to get your thoughts on him because he is a player that's animated. He's going to demand a lot. But what have you seen from Zaha before he got here, and how do you think he's going to fit in, and what have you thought about his performances so far?
Well, I should start by saying that when he was being rumored as a potential target, I was very excited. I don't think there's anyone who loves this game who watched Crystal Palace and didn't like Wilfried Zaha and what he was able to do.
Yeah.
But again, and this is pretty much what I said about Pep Biel last season, he arrives in a new league. He has new teammates whom he has to adjust to, get to know, build chemistry with. And I think that anybody who comes from abroad and plays in MLS, those first few games are like that proverbial Mike Tyson punch to the face. I just don't think a lot of players realize how difficult this league is. And I'm not suggesting in any way that Zaha came here thinking that this was going to be a cakewalk. He might have had the perception that this is a difficult league to compete in, but it's one thing to think it. It's another thing to feel it viscerally when you're playing. The speed of the game, the transitional nature of the game, which was something that actually Yuri was talking to me about at the end of last season. He said we were both watching a Crown Legacy game, and he said, I still talk to people in Portugal, and they joke around about MLS, but he really believes, and he uttered these words, that if you can be successful in MLS, adjust and be successful, you can pretty much adjust to any league because it's that difficult to be able to really adjust to the kind of football that is played here, the athleticism of this league. I just mentioned the San Diego players and how big they were and fast and strong. I was in awe, man. I had when I was younger and played academy football, I had dreams of being a professional player at some level. Obviously, I was out of my mind because that wouldn't have even happened, if every single player was my size. But when I was looking at those San Diego players, and those times when I'm looking at a Malanda or an Andrew Privet or a Kalina, who's not even the biggest goalkeeper in the world, but he's imposing, right? Where I think, what was I thinking? To think that I could compete with these guys? Are you nuts? I mean, they're just physical specimens. And so you add that to the mix, and it's just a very difficult league to hit the ground running in. And any player who comes from abroad will tell you that.
I remember Sergio. Sorry, Swift, but I remember when we interviewed Sergio Ruiz towards the end before he got sent away from the team, and we asked him about that transition. Even he said, like, "Hey, listen, I don't want to say I underestimated the league, but it's a different style of play. It's a tough transition. You also have to transition to living in Charlotte and the culture and everything like that.
The travel too.
Yep. Like it's a rough transition.
Adjusting your family. Making sure that they're comfortable. Don't forget that Zaha arrives without his family. He has to look for a place to live. His wife was about to deliver. There's a lot happening. He had a difficult time.
I think he was sick. I think he was sick too.
He was
a
sick.
Little bit. I think
he had a problem with his thumb, which he's now, had operated on. So there's just a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of the best from Zaha, but it's going to take time. And my message to fans out there, man, who are critical of Zaha, you can be disappointed that he hasn't hit the heights that you're expecting him to. Fine. And if you pay for a ticket, you have a right to an opinion. So I'm not suggesting that you don't. But if you think that a player is just going to automatically be at his best in this league or any other league and be consistently at his best, then you're living in fantasy land. You don't know this game. You're learning, and this is a lesson that should be learned.
It's not as easy as turning on FIFA on the Xbox.
It's not as easy as turning on FIFA. Yeah,
I think you need to go into the Facebook groups and say what you just said.
No, thank you. I get killed by. Listen, I already get killed on social media. I've heard and I've read when I commentate on matches. I don't need to draw any more abuse. So
you mentioned this already, and what I want to touch on. I think too for maybe people that are critical of Zaha, I don't think he's going to have to score goals and even get assists, especially early on, because he's going to draw players away from the middle, and I think that's also maybe why Pep's having some success too. Zaha's going to get double teamed, so I again, we keep saying we haven't seen full Zaha yet, so I'm excited. I'm excited for that. Another player on the opposite side, Liel Abada. We've joked, and I want to get your take personally on this because we've been critical of Abada, and we've joked that he needs to eat a couple of cheeseburgers and get on Brant Bronico's workout plan. What can you say about Abada that maybe playing devil's advocate or something we are not seeing? Because for me, if you're lightning fast, you can get away with certain things. But to me, he scored last game, all well and good, and maybe he's going to catch fire here, but he's been bodied off the ball quite a bit. And just doesn't seem to, he gets dispossessed quickly. And I Corey too, very early on, beginning of the season, was like, this needs to be Abada's year. I know Zaha's coming in, Pep's going to have a big year, but like this needs to be Abada's like make or break season. What about Abada to you stands out? Are we being too critical? Is there anything that, maybe we need to just be a little more patient?
So far to me, he seems like a streaky player. He'll have a couple of really good games, and then he'll have a few more where he's not very influential. Against San Diego, he was very influential. And, you mentioned physicality, or you're alluding to it. I thought he was very physical against San Diego.
Maybe he listened and ate
maybe
some cheeseburgers.
He's been listening
to
your podcast. he does not appear to me to be the kind of player who can bulk up a lot, because if he does, he will probably risk that fleet-of-footedness that
That's fair.
that makes him dangerous. He's a slight guy, you know, and you really saw that again. I hate to harp on this point, but you saw that against San Diego. You know,
Yeah.
and yet he contested a lot of 50-50 balls. He did not lose possession too often. And I saw that when he did, you know, lose possession, you know, a little wayward pass here or there, it impacted him. Like he shook his head, like it frustrated him. So he seems to me to be a player who understands that he's not playing at the level that he's able to enough, that understands that the expectations are that with the price tag and with that designation, he needs to. And that can both drive him, but it can also prove a hindrance. Because if you continue to put that pressure on yourself, it might prevent you from being as loose as you need to be to play your best football. He was loose against San Diego. I fear that he comes away from that game against San Diego thinking, I should have scored at least another goal, as opposed to, man, I created a lot of opportunities for other players, and by attracting players to him, because there were times when he attracted a couple of players to the near side, and then he passed the ball, and there was a lot more space for people to exploit on the weak side.
I hate to kind of be a jerk about it, but one of the things I was thinking about, and again, that's why I want to ask you, maybe I'm being a little too critical, but I was like, we need our DP to be a little more clinical in front of goal, especially when there's one man standing there and you have the whole goal to shoot out and you hit him in the head. So like, but you could tell it upset him there, but I'm wondering if maybe, especially me, I need to be a little more patient and understanding if I'm maybe missing something.
No, look, Matt, I mean, how many tattoos do you have Charlotte FC on your body? I think
got a couple.
You and those of your ilk have the right to be critical of any player, because you spend a lot of time, you dedicate a lot of time to this team, as do all of you, right? And you put your money where your mouth is. You're at all these events. So I don't think anybody can look at any one of you guys and say, oh, these are just these hysterical fans who should just shut up, right? So I think that it is fair to criticize some of his performances. But by the same token, I think it's important to also realize when he does things that impact how the game develops. If he doesn't score that goal, I know Pep Biel, you know, lays out the red carpet for him to strut onto, but that was a really good finish for the first goal as well.
Well, he also made a good run to get into that
position,
place to play the ball to Pep. So
right, that goal conditions the game. It changes the game completely, because up to that point, San Diego had something like 70% possession. And while they didn't create much, and let me talk about Nick Scardina for a second. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, what a performance in that game. The way he shut down Chucky was super impressive, and he must have been very nervous. And then to find Anjiman for the play that leads to the penalty and the red card, that pass, because I was right there, and he kind of looked at two players. One of them was Westwood. I forget who it was on the right side. It was probably Abada. And he thought, well, they've got guys run on top of them. There's nothing I can do here. And then he has to make a split-second decision to hit that ball wrong with a little bit of curve, because he had somebody breathing down his neck, right? So I guess the point that I'm making here is that at that point, San Diego were controlling proceedings without threatening. The goal changes everything, because now San Diego have to be a little bit more aggressive, and they don't want to do that against a team that has as much speed available to them as Charlotte.
So you mentioned Scardina just a second ago, but is there anybody else on the roster this year, or, you know, I guess individual performances that's really stood out to you? Is there any other players that you're just like, wow, I wasn't expecting that, or they just really have impressed you so far this year?
It's not about not expecting that. And Lloyd called me the other day, and he said that he had spoken to Z, and to just commend Z on putting this team together, something like that. I forget exactly what it was, and he said, Eric, if you look at this team, look at the experience, look at the different profiles of players. This is a really good squad. The first 11 is a really good 11 with lots of different profiles of players who can make a difference in any given game. So, is there anybody that surprised me? Not necessarily. But what has impressed me has been the consistency shown by so many players. Look at Privet. Gets a red card that wasn't a red card. It's not appealed because I don't think the club believed that they'd win the appeal. He was left on the bench for that next game and comes on. Montreal, right? Was it Montreal? I think it was Montreal. Makes a huge difference. Scores a goal in this game. Is solid. A guy who wasn't a center back, who was transitioned into a center back in a system that hung him out to dry last season because of the high line. Didn't impact him. If anything, he just grew. Tim Ream is consistent. He's always been a guy that I've argued, I don't know if you guys remember this, but a few years ago, if anything happened with the U.S. national team, it was Tim Ream's fault. Tim Ream.
Yes.
He might have had a really good game. He's playing left back.
Talking to Jay Landskroner?
I was about to say, that sounds like someone we know named Jay.
No, but he's right about that only. Nothing else, Jay. But he's consistent. He didn't even warm up before coming into that game because Doumbia went off injured. Doumbia's come in and done well. Everybody is just playing a part. A sub comes in. Scardina is the perfect example. And Brant Bronico said this after the last game. He said, we have a team with the next man up mentality. I don't know if that was a term that he used, but his point was anybody can come onto this team, when somebody else is unavailable. Now, Nathan Byrne, unfortunately, will be gone for a while, and he's been ultra consistent as well. And he's been consistent since he's arrived here, even when he was playing as an inverted left back. I know he had this one bad game against the New York Red Bulls where he slips. He may have actually been fouled by Elias Manuel. Do you remember that goal?
I'm impressed that you remember who the player was. But ask me my children's birthday. No, I'm kidding. That's not true. That one I know. I think. But so everybody's been consistent. And the one guy that I always have to talk about because I got laughed at by two guys who I consider friends years ago, and that's Christian Kalina. When I said that he was one of the better goalkeepers in the league, and Andrew Wiebe and Matt Doyle. Bless their souls. Good people. And by the way, incredible ambassadors to this league. So I'm not going to say a bad thing about them, even though I disagree with them on occasion, especially Matt Doyle. I'll text Matt Doyle, especially I'm with you on that one.
When Pep Biel was cooking, I texted him, how about Pep Biel, huh? Not that he'd ever said anything negative about him, but I just felt like I needed to do that. Christian Kalina, man. Where do we find this guy? Ludogorets? What a goalkeeper.
He has, I won't say drastically improved, but I we've talked about his distribution and kicking the ball out of bounds and had some shaky, weird goals against him where he was out of position but he has just been so solid.
Matt, he was asked to do things. Do you guys remember the preseason tournament in 2022 in Charleston?
Oh, yeah, I was there. Yes.
You were there. And George was in goal. I can't believe I said in net. I'm becoming Americanized.
There you go.
He was in goal. And Miguel Angel Ramirez was basically asking him to wait until he had a forward in his face to dish the ball. And I remember turning because Lloyd and I were watching those games, and I was like, wow, they're taking a lot of risks. That was the football that Miguel Angel Ramirez wanted. And then that was the football that Lattanzio wanted. So all of a sudden, instead of having a goalkeeper who's just worried about making saves and doing the things that he's supposed to do 90% of the time, he's having to worry about what pass he's making, and how long he should wait in order to make the pass. And he's basically playing sweeper keeper so often. How often was he caught off his line? Not because he was just going for a walk, but just because he needed to be in a different position. Now he has got a consistent approach in front of him, and not, an enormous field empty of defenders. Now he looks at guys who are close to him. His distribution is good. His distribution was always good. He just made high profile mistakes because he was put in that position, and that is what people remember. But he is an unbelievable goalkeeper, and by his metrics right now, he is the front runner with maybe another 2 guys for MLS goalkeeper of the year. I know we're 8 games in, but that's how good he's been.
For sure.
And he has faced more shots than any other goalkeeper in the league.
Yeah, we're all smirking because I think we feel validated for all of our Miguel and Lattanzio hate that we've had on the show.
There's no hate from me, man. There's no hate from me.
You're fine, but
there were disagreements, and Miguel Angel Ramirez. It might be the reason I'm in Charlotte. I kid you not, and I don't know if I said this I probably did in that first podcast, but when he signed for Charlotte, I took that as a sign because I'd called so many of his games, including his Sudamericana win in 2019, that I called my agent and I was like, get me to Charlotte. Get me an interview. That's where I'm supposed to be. So I was disappointed in what happened, and I don't think he liked me a lot, if I'm being completely honest. I don't know why. And Lattanzio had a good relationship with him, so I didn't agree with the kind of football he was playing, and I thought that sometimes Lloyd and I pushed back a little on him on air, not on him, but on the approach, because we were honest, and I'm not sure he enjoyed that, but we called it as we saw it. And his problem was that he wasn't pragmatic enough, or at all for that matter.
Eric, was I the first fan that you met when you were in Charlotte? Do you remember?
Yes, when you accosted me at the jersey release.
I think what happened was that
I was lost.
You just got out of your car and you were lost.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, I was like, I know you.
Yeah.
And then, we're trying to find your way to the kit launch.
No other man has ever said that to me in the dark before, by the way. I know you. But I looked back and I was like, he's got a baby and a lady with him. I think I'm safe.
Okay. Yeah, I had recognized you, from photos and everything. I was like, oh, that's Eric. And I think you literally had just gotten into town.
Yes.
You got out of your car, and I'm like, he looks like he might be lost.
I just had enough time to shower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that was, wow. That seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? And now we're having coffee every once in a while.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, what a relationship.
I'm crackling up at the image of this tattooed man in the dark alley of Camp North End carrying a baby with a random lady.
It was very confusing, like how to get down to the event.
Yes, and I'm glad you said down, because the best part of that was when he saw me, there was like this little ravine that he had to take the stroller down with his wife, but he just left them to toil for themselves as he came to introduce himself to me. How that night could have turned out so differently were it not for the actual physical strength of your wife.
Yeah, she's stronger than I am.
Yeah,
so.
It's hysterical.
But yeah, that was a great year, man. I 2022. Probably the best year of my career, just in terms of just how much fun it was, and the people that I met, and the people that I worked with. It was just an incredible year.
But David, I know you got another question, and I know we're running kind of low on time, but I want to ask you, what's it been like for you to be here kind of from the beginning and really like start this, like behind, I've got it tattooed my arm, got it behind me. We've got the attendance record. Mm-hmm. What has it all meant for you and your family? And like, how special has it been for you to be here from the beginning and kind of see this grow?
It's meant a lot. I remember one time, I called a game in 2022. I think it may have been the 4-0 against Philadelphia. And I was driving
Rios game.
the Rios game, and I was driving home, and I was feeling grateful. And the reason I was feeling grateful was because it was just for so many reasons. I was a little emotional in the car, weeping. No, I wasn't weeping, but you know those moments where you kind of realize that what's happened to you, and we all have these moments, that you're just lucky in that moment.
Mhm.
I was grateful that I was with this team, associated with this team. I was grateful that my voice and Lloyd's voice were and Katie Witham's were forever associated with that game, with that historic moment, with the feeling that everybody felt in that stadium. And I felt that way against Columbus as well, the 2-2 game, when we just
that was
missed out on the playoffs.
Yeah.
And that was the best environment I've ever experienced at the bank. When Rio scores, and then there's a second goal, and the crowd erupts in a way. And again, it was just one of those moments, man, am I really doing this? Am I really a part of this? So to answer your question, it's meant everything, because it was the trust of the organization. You know, Darius Barnes, Nick Kelly at the time, and then Joe LeBeau when he came in. It was the way I was welcomed by the fans, which was amazing, and just the community, that I felt like I belonged to. So, and just I feel like I'm a part of this team, and if I ever move, which I'm sure is likely given given my career at some point or another. I'm sure Charlotte at some point, and I mean the city, will get sick and tired of me. I will always feel a part of the fabric of the soccer culture in the city, and a part of Charlotte FC.
You just give me goosebumps about that Columbus game, because I remember that game. Like it makes me just that Columbus game, and then just having more home playoffs games. Like it's going to be something special when more of those happen. But that Columbus one I was there with my dad. It's a very special memory for that. So it's awesome. So
because it's also about hope, right? That game was about hope. You know, against the odds. Can we do this? We didn't in the end, but man, for a while, everybody really believed, and everybody was in it together. And one last thing, because I know we're going long. You know, I wish that the stadium, and of course the team has to produce in order for the stadium to get to that point, right? To reach that that apex. But there are times when I'm in the stadium and the team needs a pick me up, and I'm not sure they always get it. And I can understand the argument from the other side, which is, well, they're not giving us something to cheer for. And in that game, man, that team, not the team, those fans, you guys, you managed to galvanize that team to get back into that game, because they were shorthanded. They were down 2 goals. Salarian chipped Kalina from half fields. There was a lot going against them, and it was the frenzy in the stands that I think inspired the comeback.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch that game tonight. It's what you're making me do. So, sorry. So last question I got for you, Eric. Here, so we're about to hit a tough stretch of road matches ahead. You know, after this weekend, obviously we got the home game against New England, but we've got Columbus away, North Carolina FC an Open Cup away, Nashville away, Orlando away, and not including that's what I think 4 out of the 7 matches that we're going to have in May. How are you feeling about the month of May ahead of us for the club, especially around some of the injury concerns that you mentioned earlier, like Nathan Byrne, Suleiman out potentially. We don't know anything confirmed from that perspective, but how are you feeling with that stretch ahead of us?
It's going to be tough, and I'll add another wrinkle. One of those matches, away matches, the one against Orlando, is in the midweek. So it's not only all these away matches, but it's just how quickly they'll be coming. Because Tuesday will be the Open Cup game against North Carolina, and I know that, just like he said in that first press conference, I know that Dean wants to win that to win the competition. So I think it's going to be tough, but I think that away stretch will look different if Charlotte beat New England on Saturday, because you add 3 points, you've made the most out of your games at the bank, tallied every single point available, and that takes pressure away from the next matches. I think that some of those players will go into Columbus, which is a really tough team even without Cucho, will go thinking, listen, we're going to play our game. We can get something out of this. We get a point, we're good. So if they get, I don't know, I would say that you get 3 points out of, and I'm being a little bit of a pessimist here, because I know how difficult it is to travel, especially with very few days of rest in between. But if you get 3 points here in that road stretch, you're okay. Well, obviously, I think they're going to get more, but you're okay. So I think that what I don't want to see is doom and gloom from the fans. They have to understand that this stretch is going to be very difficult. And then 2 games at home against 2 very good teams, Chicago and Columbus. I've seen, I think, every Chicago game just to see what they're all about. And they're a good team. Defensively, not so much. But on the offensive end, they're very good. And then it's 5 matches in a row away from home. So all that to say, get it done at home. Get those wins at home. That way you don't feel the pressure on the road. Although I've just heaped pressure on their home performances.
Maybe Columbus can help us go play in Cleveland Brown Stadium again.
Oh yeah,
give us some advantage here. No, I'm just checking. No,
that sounded a little bit bitter, Dave.
No. It's okay. I have some strong feelings in the messy stuff, but that's okay. It's all good. But Swift, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, I think there's some. You were saying making sure the fans don't get too critical. There are natural ebbs and flows to an MLS season for all teams, and we've said a lot of times this league is not like other leagues where if you lose, I'll bring up Arsenal again, you lose 3 games and somehow you're still not going to be first because the team in first has lost 1 or 2 games. It's not like that in this league. You can lose 6, 7, 8 games and still win the league or get into the playoffs at least. So I mean, you've covered MLS a lot. Should we be worried if we start dropping points? Is there this kind of natural ebb and flow to the league? And what can Charlotte do, or what's the difference now than where we were maybe last season or year before, where we don't have quite as dips?
I think it comes down to what I said earlier, that this team is just built on a different foundation now. They built the foundation last season, and now they're building on the foundation. The resilience, the belief, the confidence. I think those are very important factors going into this very, very, very difficult stretch. And I actually have to look to see whether there's any other team in the league that has as difficult a stretch as that. Take Montreal out of the equation, because Montreal starts its first 7 or 8 games away from home, which is super difficult to do, and yet they still sacked their head coach. It was a guy who I really liked, and he gave time to commentators. He'd meet you on the field before the game and answer whatever questions. I'm basically extolling his virtues, and I can't think of his name right now. It's being a parent is hard, man.
It is. It is.
But I do want to say something, Matt, because I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing fans. Sure. I just, and certainly this isn't about Charlotte fans, but there is sometimes an overreaction to those ebbs and flows that you're talking about. you will know if a team is in trouble in this league, because it's not a few drop points or two consecutive losses on the road in this league that means you're in trouble. It's you've just lost 2 away from home, and you've lost the next one at home, and you only tied the next one after that. And it's when you get into a tailspin that you can't get out of. That's when you know that you're in trouble. So it's overreactions, and I think there's just a few people, a few diehard fans that feel that way. Most are sort of even keeled, but that the loudest ones in the rooms are the ones who feel the more heightened senses of urgency and drama.
I don't know. You probably haven't listened to the last 10 episodes, but there was this time where we lost.
I listened to some.
There was a time where we didn't win 5 games in a row. And that was when Tim Ream played center back, and then we moved him to left back, and then we didn't lose a game all season long until we got into the playoffs.
You're not blaming Tim Ream for those losses, are you?
I am just stating a fact that when Tim
it was Swiss fact, by the way.
When Tim Ream has played center back, we have not won a game, but when he plays left back, we have not lost a game. We've lost 1 game to Miami when he did play left back, if you don't count the Orlando series. Just saying.
Yeah, but I'll also just say, just on the other side, because that is true. But I will actually say that the problems in those games weren't necessarily defensive problems. It was with the ball at their feet. Because one of the things that changed when Dean put Privet back into the lineup with Tim was that Charlotte started building with a back 3. And so all of a sudden, things just clicked a little bit better. Pep Biel's positioning was more central. He wasn't stuck on the paint anymore, on the chalk.
Yeah.
Even though he was drifting to the right, which he has a tendency to do, as every lefty does. But he was a little bit more central, so that changed things. So I think it was less about Tim Ream being a center back without the ball, and more about how the team was building out with Tim Ream in that position. Because when you have his left foot and he's slightly to the left in that back 3, he can ping anybody. And he was pinging players, including Brandt Bronico, who made great runs down the corridor, particularly against DC United in the last match of the season. And one more thing. Against Nashville, first half, they were trying to build with a 4. They started building with a 3 in the second half, changed the whole complexion of the game.
Now, when you say 3, that you're talking kind of like Tim, Malanda, Privet, and let Byrne kind of venture forward. Is that kind of what? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Byrne becomes almost like a winger,
because that dude can dribble and go with the ball. It's kind of fun to see him
inexhaustible.
The field. Yeah,
inexhaustible. It's the guy has a motor. He and Brandt. I'm trying to think who else runs like that on that team. Well, Ash, Westy. It's not as noticeable, but I couldn't believe when I looked at the data before the last game of the season and I saw him warming up, and I said, do you realize that if you just play in this game, you will have run more miles than any other player in the league? And he was second for most of the season.
Yeah.
And he had no idea. He had no idea.
I know we're running along, but I want to ask you our opponent this weekend, and it's something we've talked about on the show. Carlos Hill, you've got to contain him. How do you do that with and still be able to go forward yourself with Brant Westwood and Pep? Because Pep's main objective is not to play defense. So I know sometimes we like to clog that middle, and we've come out with a more defensive shape, which I don't like and did not work, but that's another thing. What are your thoughts on New England coming out with that midfield? Is there anything different that you think we need to do, or you stick with that kind of that middle core 3?
No, I think you stick with what you've been doing. You've got Westy and Brandt Bronico. One of them is going to keep a close eye on Carlos Hill, depending on where he drifts to. He's having a really good season. In fact, if it weren't for him, New England would be further down the pecking order. I will say this about New England. They've won 3 of the last 4. Ganago is starting to hit his stride. I called his games when he was at Lens years ago. I thought he was playing out of position in the beginning of the season, and I actually texted that to one of the beat writers who have a very good relationship with Seth McComber, who's a great follow, by the way, on Twitter. He does great work for the Blazing Musket. Everybody does at that publication, and all of a sudden, Caleb Porter's changed to a back three so he can have Gana go further up the field as a center forward alongside now Campana. First, it was out of necessity because Campana was out injured, and so now he and Campana are playing together. So they look like a better team, and that system also affords Carles Gil a little bit more freedom to roam and pick up the game where he needs to. So things starting to work out for Caleb Porter. And the one area that might surprise people watching New England is that defensively, they've gotten pretty sound. I think they've got one of the best defensive records in the league right now, if I'm not mistaken. But it's only been in the last few games, and part of that is because of Ivicic as well, who is a goalkeeper who doesn't get the credit he deserves. And he's one of the guys, by the way, that I was mentioning. I don't think his numbers are as good as Kalina, but man, he is a very, very good goalkeeper.
Yeah. Seven goals against, which is right with us.
Same as us, yeah.
Yeah,
same as us.
Goals 4 or 6, so that's where they're kind of lacking a little bit. But yeah,
shooting from distance is do not give Carles Gil any space at the edge of the box or in the hole, because that guy. I mean, I remember even in that first ever win against New England, there was a moment where he cuts inside and from 25 yards out, he hits the crossbar with a beautiful curler. That would have changed that game as well. So it's moments, man. It's moments, and he can create those moments just like Pep Biel can. And to see those two guys going against each other is going to be great. I'll be in the stadium, so nice. I'll be happy to watch it live.
Yeah, it's one of, you talk about little moments, and I think that's the thing when we hit this May schedule and we're on the road. I think we really need someone like Zaha to make something out of nothing, like at least get into the box and get fouled, get a PK called. I think for him personally, I think this road stretch he needs to come up with something. I think we're going to need it. But yes, there's little moments, and we've been kind of going back and forth talking about Carles Gil and someone like that, like having that middle three. There's been some chatter too about some of our fans and some articles I've read, and is our defense as good as it was last year, and can we maintain this pace with the midfield that I have? But you're saying that there's really no worry there because we do have Brandt and Westwood. But the difference now is that we have a number 10 that can actually do something going forward.
And not only that, look at who we have on the bench as well. I thought Gianni came in very well against San Diego to calm things down. He's so good in possession, very difficult to dispossess. He also when he's on his game, he's quite good in terms of controlling tempo, and you saw that against San Diego. And then Eric Williamson. Can we just talk about a guy who's represented the U.S. national team? A guy I've really enjoyed talking to. He also came into the game and controlled possession, and he has that little something, the ball on the string, like he can juke left, juke right, draw challenges and get away from defenders. He can start. What do you mean he can start? He can start. He's a starter.
Yeah.
He's a starter who's on the bench right now. So this is a deep squad. I think we're still going to hopefully see more from Yuri. And let me tell you, the not only do I see him in practice, but I know what the feeling is at the club about the quality that Yuri has. And everybody saw it from Crown Legacy. I know it's a different level. And he's a grinder, but right now he's blocked by two DPs. And so is Vargas, who has had a good season. So this is a team, again, it's that next man up attitude or I can't think of the word right now, but the point is there are guys who can step up and play a role for this team in pretty much every position. And then the last guy to prove that fact was Nick Scardina.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so when you have a kid who's never started for Charlotte, and I can't believe I just called him a kid, but just, you know, who never started for Charlotte and then
We're
puts in a
old. You can do
performance
that.
like that. Yeah, I know. Speak for yourself. But so next man up mentality is what I was going for.
Yeah.
So I think that the team is fine. And Dean is going to have to depend on other guys with this schedule, especially in North Carolina, in the U.S. Open Cup.
Yeah, this is May is going to be so interesting to me because not only is it a very, very tough schedule, now we have to do it without Nathan Byrne. Doumbia is also injured.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see how we do. And again, I think we're really going to have to rely on someone like Zaha, you know, Patrick, Abada to make something out of nothing to get a point on the road. And that's why, like, if we drop some points, you mentioned 3. I know that sounds really low to people. I'm like, oh my God, you have low expectations. It's not that. It's just the schedule, what we're looking at in the back, just grinding through this, getting what we can. And then after, you know, we'll get Nathan Byrne back, you know, we'll have Doumbia back, and then we're out of this kind of away schedule. Then we hit the ground running.
Right.
So I'm excited, and we might even see some changes in the summer too. So I'm
who
hopeful.
knows?
Yeah.
And those 3 points, I was just using that as a means to suggest that if it's 3 points,
it's
for nothing to scoff at.
Yeah.
That's basically the point. By the way, another guy I want to mention, just because there's a lot of excitement about him, I thought that he had immediate impact against Montreal, and that's Tiger Smalls. I think we'll probably see him against North Carolina. He's a good player, man. He's with the ball at his feet, and I want to see more from him. So again, there's some guys in there who are way down in the pecking order who can also have a say in how things go this year and how things go on the road.
All right. Last question. I was trying to see what minute wise are we at right now, David, Corey? So I want to see.
We're at an hour and 30
Wow,
minutes.
we've been on for
Well, last time
people
you hit.
are not going to enjoy this podcast.
No. We've gone long pretty much every show we've ever done. The last show you were on, we did an hour and 45 minutes. So I just wanted to see kind of where we were and if we could break that. But no, last episode, non-soccer related. You've been in Charlotte for a while. How much do you love Charlotte? What are some fun things that you've enjoyed? What surprised you about Charlotte? Because I think a lot of people, they move here and they get really kind of surprised, like what this city is. What are some of those things for you?
What has surprised me? The walkability of the city is something that surprised me. Now I don't live. I live in Charlotte, but I don't live right in the middle of the hustle and bustle.
Yeah.
As you know, Matt. The people are nice here. You know, but isn't that, what do they call it? Southern what?
Southern hospitality, baby.
Southern hospitality.
Southern charm, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That's why you like me so much. That's what I've got.
Yes, that's right. And your tats.
That's right.
The weather, although this winter was brutal for me because I've gotten used to mild winters here. You know, I came from Miami. There was no winter. So I've enjoyed that. Although it gets so hot so quickly here. You know, one day it's cold and the next day it's 90 degrees and you're like, what is going on, man? I'm still wearing a sweater. But I've pretty much enjoyed everything. And the most important part is my family's happy, man. And that's all that's important to me. And I've experienced this city differently from how I've experienced other places because here I'm a father. So I don't get to go out as much as I used to. But I've just enjoyed living here, pretty much everything. I wish there were a Portuguese restaurant in Charlotte. Can somebody please open a Portuguese restaurant? I think we have enough Portuguese influence on this team in order to get that to happen. It's just it's a great place. And, you know, we see people moving into the city all the time. I mean, the construction here is out of control. My goodness.
A lot of people moving here, a lot of people from up north escaping the winters to get down here to have a little better climate.
But escaping Florida too. I've met a lot of Floridians who are running away from that state.
They're called halfbacks. They move from up north, they go to Florida, and then they move halfway back to North Carolina.
Somebody called me that yesterday.
Oh, there you go.
And I was like, what? What did you say? Like, I was like, what did you say? That sounds like an insult. But then, no, halfback. Yeah, it's very literal, actually. Okay, good.
Yeah, we us Southerners are very literal sometimes. Like, we get right.
That's
to
okay.
It.
That's okay. Yeah. It's easier to understand.
That's right. We do talk slow, but we mean what we say.
Sweaty
balls. I don't know what even that meant, but there you go.
That perfectly encompasses Southern right there. It's like, I'm just going to talk and I don't know what I mean, but yeah, it's
okay. Yes. And well, I think that's most people are like that, including me.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining the show. Maybe next time we won't wait almost 100 episodes to get you. You back
I don't know, because given how long we've been and how long-winded my answers to your questions have been, I think a lot of people may not want you to invite me back.
No, I think as much as we can be quiet and you talk, I think people will enjoy that. So.
Corey, I don't know how you haven't fallen asleep yet, man.
No, this has been great. I've enjoyed it.
I'm glad.
Usually when it's just the two of them, I do fall asleep, but you catch me up. This has been good.
Catch him nodding off.
I turn the camera off and go lay down on the couch over here and take a little nap.
Well, at one point you did turn the camera off, so it was a quick nap. It was a quick nap. No, but always a pleasure. Nap. It's great to talk to you guys, and obviously, always great when I see you guys in person. Although, Dave, where are you these days, man?
You're telling me, man. I'm in South Kakalaki now, so it takes me a bit. It takes me a bit to get up there, but I'll be up there this weekend.
Okay, I'll see you this weekend then. Sometimes I just see you at a distance, just wandering at the speed of light, dragging your wife behind you.
Right. Trying to drag her into the stadium.
Yeah,
exactly.
At least you don't abandon your wife with the stroller. You actually drag her, with you. So that's good. It's an improvement on Matt Swift.
Yeah.
I don't abandon a child in the stroller.
No.
They had it. They've got it, man.
Yeah, they had it sorted.
Don't need me.
But yeah,
you were in distress, so I need to help you.
I was certainly in distress. I was feeling more distressed when a man said, "I know you" in the darkness of Charlotte. But I was quickly assuaged by your bearded good looks.
Thanks. My southern charm,
Yes.
That's what a gentleman does, is help.
Indeed.
But thank you so much for joining the show. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks, guys. Anytime.